Is it time to back up the Brinks truck? At least Emmanuel Quickley thinks so. What's up? This is Orange and Blue Bloods. EJ Stewart, Tommy Beer coming at you. We got a lot to talk about on this free agent extravaganza episode of Orange and Blue Bloods. First, we will talk about Emmanuel Quickley reportedly wanting a big payday. He thinks so. He's a $100 million man. Do the Knicks think so? I'll ask Tommy that on this podcast. We'll also break down all the big storylines heading into this free agency, which begins on Friday. Plenty of big storylines, plenty of big names out there, plenty of guys the Knicks may be looking at. So we'll break all that down. And we have a new CBA that goes into effect. How does that affect the Knicks? How does that affect the rest of the NBA? We'll talk more about that and more coming up. Orange and Blue Bloods right now.
If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
This is Orange and Blue Bloods. Tommy Beer with me. A lot to discuss on this episode. Tommy, how you feeling?
Feeling good. Thursday, right before the start of free agency, and a pretty big day in Knicks land. We're recording this around 1 o'clock Thursday afternoon, so we're still waiting to hear about the Josh Hart news. He has until this evening, and that is something obviously to keep an eye on, because that could kind of give us an idea of if he does opt in and the Knicks do the opt-in and extend route. That may be an indication the Knicks plan to use their mid-level exception, which would certainly make things a bit more entertaining over the next few days and weeks for the Knickerbockers, as they would have a lot more options in terms of, up to $12 million for the mid-level exception, as opposed to just their biannual exception, right around 4.5. So we should get a better idea of where things stand. And then obviously we have a free agency beginning of Friday evening. And at some point over the next couple months before the Knicks have right up until the start of the 2023-2024 season, they have to make a decision about Immanuel Quickley. And let's start there, EJ.
Let's start there. So again, this is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, an Audacy WFAN original, a podcast that you can get wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time we drop twice a week during the off season. So make sure you guys hit that auto download feature so you can get these episodes whenever we release them. So you'll be ready to go and listen to your boys EJ and Tommy discuss Knicks basketball. Also check us out on YouTube. You can catch us on the WFAN channel and the Audacy Sports channel. So Emmanuel Quickley is reportedly eyeing a big payday. At least that's what rival teams believe at this point in time. So you had Heavy.com NBA reporter Sean Devaney say a league executive told him that Emmanuel Quickley is seeking a 9-figure deal in his next contract. The league exec said, quote, he's going to want 9 figures, and that's for 4 years. I can't say the Knicks will go that high, but they might have to. He's not a guy you want to send to restricted free agency. So Emmanuel Quickley is coming off the best season of his career. He was a runner-up for Sixth Man of the Year this season, an award I think he should have won. I think Tommy agrees. He posted a career best 14.9 points per game on almost 45% field goal shooting and 37% from three. So Tommy, are you comfortable with the Knicks paying Emmanuel Quickley $100 million plus on a 4-year contract?
So here's what I'll say. The players are worth what they can command on the open market. And obviously that's what Quickley and his agent are trying to determine. And that's what the Knicks are trying to figure out as well. At the moment, I think it's probably a bit of a stretch I wouldn't say it's a difficult argument to make, but it's a challenging argument to make that he could command $100 million on the open market, an average annual value of around $25 million per season. Not outside the realm of possibility, when you consider guys like Jordan Poole signed a $128 million rookie extension. Yep. Tyler Hero, $120 million rookie extension. Are those players more valuable than Emmanuel Quickley? I don't know. So when you factor in the rising cap, and we'll talk about the CBA. Despite the cap rising, there's going to be a downward push on escalating contracts, especially at the higher end, the $100 million, et cetera. So here's kind of where I sit in terms of, big picture on IQ. I think the Knicks will come in offering somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 for 70, 75, 80 in that neighborhood. They'll start a little bit low, ideally planning to end up with around 4 for 85 with 78 guaranteed, somewhere in there, some maybe a descending value, some of the other things, a player option, team option, etc. IQ's camp will obviously start at 105, 110, and then come down maybe. So I think they do meet somewhere in the middle. My concern for the Knicks would be, while it's difficult to make an argument that he's a no-brainer $100 million player at this moment, if he plays as next season as well as he played this season and hits restricted free agency, he's going to get an offer in excess of 100 million, or at least at that $100 million number. There's going to be plenty of teams with cap space. And if you're a young team, the Spurs, the Rockets, obviously, these, the Magic, these are teams, the Pistons, these are teams that, fit is obviously plays a role, but part of that beauty of IQ's value is his versatility. So I think there's a lot to be said there. Ultimately, I think the Knicks have to do what it takes to secure a deal. You want to play hardball for a little while, wait up to the 11th hour, wait up to the day before the regular season starts. I have no problem with that. It's training camp may be a bit awkward in preseason games, etc. But long story short, I think it's really important to lock down Immanuel Quickley. You talked about his numbers. He's led the Knicks in plus minus last 2 years. The Knicks are a better basketball team when he's on the floor. His versatility. He's a smart kid, a good kid. Doesn't cause waves or problems. He's a guy you want to. This is a franchise that believes itself to be on the rise, and we both agree that it's ascending.
Yeah.
He's the type of guy you want to keep around because things, he organizes the offense. He is a great defender. There's a lot to like there, and the Knicks should not let him get away.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like, to me, this is the stare down that I've been anticipating for this franchise for a while now. And I feel like I've hinted at it. I've kind of pointed to it. And sometimes I kind of say, it's something to look at. And I think that this offseason will be extremely interesting. And this being kind of the first domino of what I think will be a negotiation that may get played a little bit out in the media. Now, this, of course, is from a rival executive, but I don't take that and think, oh, that's something that means I could discredit it. I mean, rival executives talk to agents of all players, and Emmanuel Quickley's representation represents other players. So I'm sure they're asking, hey, what's Emmanuel Quickley going to go for, you think? And this is what they're apparently telling teams. And they want to tell teams because if they do get the restricted free agency and the Knicks don't give it an extension, this is what he's going to be looking for potentially next year. Now, Emmanuel Quickley had a great season last season, particularly regular season. I'm emphasizing he was spectacular. His defense, I think, underrated. One of the best defensive guards coming off the bench in the league last year. His efficiency coming off the bench, his shot creation, his shot making ability, everything improved for Emmanuel Quickley. Then the playoffs came, and the playoffs were an entirely different animal for Emmanuel Quickley. He struggled mightily in the Cleveland series. He struggled mightily in the Miami series, and then he got hurt and couldn't finish that series, and that's how his season ended. And as I tweeted, I'll say on this podcast, if Emmanuel Quickley came to me and I was Leon Rose and he asked me I want 100+ million, I just start reading off his game log for what he did during the playoffs. Because when I look at giving a guy's $100 million contract, and it's not the same as it was, 15, 20 years ago. The money's a lot different now, obviously. But when I'm thinking about giving out that kind of money, Jalen Brunson last year came off of a incredible postseason run. And the contract he got from Dallas to the Knicks was 4 years, $107 million. That was him as their starting point guard, led his team to a conference finals, beat one team essentially without his best player, Luka Doncic, and it was coming to New York to be their starting point guard. He got 4 years, 107. In my head, I don't think a year later, I know, obviously we're in an inflation situation, but I don't think a year later, that then turns to Emmanuel Quickley, six-man candidate, played a good regular season, had a terrible playoffs, that then he's worth pretty much what Jalen Brunson got last season based on his performance. That does not add up. Jalen Brunson was better than Quickley's regular season was when Jalen Brunson played with the Dallas Mavericks, and he was way better than Quickley was in the postseason. Now, as you said, the market dictates what you're worth. So if you're the Knicks, do you risk saying we're not going to pay him that and maybe say, hey, we want you for 85 or 90 and have that maybe send IQ in a situation where he says, well, I'm just going to go to free agency because I think I can get a lot more. That's going to be the risk because, as I've said on this show, and I'll say it now more definitively because we're finally really talking about it, like, I think someone will give Immanuel Quickley $100 million to be their starting point guard. Like, I 100% believe that. If I was him, I would not sign an extension for the Knicks at 85 or 90 million because it's going to cap his ability to make more money moving forward in his career because he's always going to be playing behind Jalen Brunson while he's here. Jalen Brunson will always be the starting point guard. And if Jalen Brunson's always going to be starting point guard, that also means Immanuel Quickley will almost probably never be the starting shooting guard. Like, you're not going to play those two guys probably in a backcourt together as your starting backcourt. So there's a future where RJ's traded or Grimes is traded. I don't think that IQ becomes the full-time starting shooting guard. So you're always going to be a six-man kind of guy for the Knicks, which means that you're only going to get six-man kind of money. So at what point do you say, hey, maybe I don't sign this. I see what I do next year, and then let's see what the money is. Now, if I don't play up to that contract and it is what it is, I take that risk. That's fine. But if I do play the way I did last year, somebody's going to offer me $100 million, and then Knicks going to have to make a tough decision. Either I get the money I want, or I go somewhere else and I become a starter and I have opportunity to really make myself a star in this league. That's got to be the question Immanuel Quickley's asking. And if I think he was smart, I don't think he would sign an extension for less than at least 95. Like, I think that he absolutely can get more.
I'll say this, and we talked about it. You mentioned it specifically, earlier in the season. The Mavericks came to Jalen Brunson and said, "We'll do $55 million for 4 years."
Right.
Rick Brunson went to the
Rick
Mavericks.
Brunson, yeah.
Said, we'll do 55 for 4. And the Mavericks hemmed and hawed and eventually, dropped the ball. And Brunson bet on himself and parlayed that into double the salary. And the reason Rick Brunson would do that is because there's a lot of unknowns. There's, what happens if you get injured? What happens if you have a poor season? And these are the questions that Immanuel Quickley is going to have to wrestle with if Leon Rose drops an $85 million check in front of his face. That's hard to turn down. This is a player that hasn't cashed in relatively well. I think. And to your Brunson point, I understand that the comparisons are not apples to oranges, and Quickley would fight back and say, "I'm a far superior defensive player. I'm not in, Nobody's going to argue that." But listen, both sides of the ball. The reason the Knicks stole Jalen Brunson was because teams were worried: is he going to get dominated defensively?
Yeah.
Full-time guard, can he handle the and all that, etc. And there's plenty of questions around Emmanuel Quickley. Certainly, no one would suggest that he's worth more than Jalen Brunson, but his ability to contribute on both ends, even when he's struggling offensively, to contribute on the defensive end is really what drives his value. I think that there's a compromise to be reached here. And again, I do think a compromise will be reached because, as I talked about, for Brunson to turn down that money, our producer JJ, mentioned it right before we went on air here. You don't want to be that Dennis Schroeder situation where Schroeder turned down $84 million to sign a couple $5 million deals. His agent told him, "You're guaranteed, no question, you're going to get." Then other teams signed point. And all of a sudden there's all these chairs. You figure one will be left for you. If they're not, you'll find yourself in trouble. That's what happened with Schroeder, and one of the all-time bad fumbles in recent NBA history. So that has to be in the back of his mind. My sense is a deal gets done, and I think there's a compromise. Maybe the Knicks offer a little bit less money than Quickley would like, but give him a player option for that fourth and final season. Remember, Quickley's just 23 years old. Just celebrated his 24th birthday. So if he comes and I think last week, June, he was June 17th, his birthday. So, 12 days ago, just turned 24.
Yeah.
So last year, he was 23 the entire season. This season, he'll be 24 the entire season. So if you sign a 3-year deal with the player option, one, you lock in that money. Worst case scenario, 85, 80, 90 million. If you play really well for that 3-year stretch, then you hit free agency at 27 years old and can really sign a high value deal. So I think that's where I could see that kind of compromise, kind of both sides agreeing to that.
Yeah, that's funny because with the Knicks, when we've gotten to these points with players, every time you think, there's going to be an inflection point when it comes to a contract negotiation, that's never happened. I mean, Julius Randle has a great season the first year under Tibbs, and you're thinking, okay, he's going to be in for this massive, huge payday. And then he signs a contract that you think at the time, this seems pretty reasonable. Then RJ Barrett, like he has a really good season, saying, all right, how much money are you going to give him? Do we really believe in him to be a full max guy? You're really going to give him $160 million. He signs for 107 guaranteed. And you're like, oh, wow, okay, that maybe he's kind of reasonable.
And a lot of people said RJ's not going to settle for that. He's going to,
right.
But the Knicks have done a good job in finding that middle ground, kind of threading that needle.
Right. And you can make the case even Mitchell Robinson's free agency. Yep. Like, I think a lot of people thought Mitchell Robinson was going to be gone. And first day kind of surprise free agency, Mitchell Robinson signed to a deal. And you look at the money, say 4 years, $60 million. Pretty reasonable. Like they never, it doesn't seem like the Knicks, and that's why I think the Knicks, their salary cap situation has been kind of envied by a lot of other teams and other franchises, because you look at these players that produce for them, you don't have guys making 35, 40 million. You don't have guys making way more than they're supposed to, with the exception of Fournier currently on the roster. Like, they don't have those kind of contracts. So it seems like the Knicks front office has done a really good job of building a rapport with these guys that are on the team, that they want to stay in New York and they want to be a part of what the Knicks are building. So maybe this will be the case with Immanuel Quickley. It just feels like the one that could be different to me. I don't know why I get that sense. That's just the weird feeling I get. I hope I'm wrong. I don't sit here and say I hope Immanuel Quickley leaves or he doesn't sign with the Knicks. I think he's an instrumental piece to the Knicks. Like I said in the last podcast, there are players you look at and say, when you get to the promised land, you think this guy will be here. I feel like Immanuel Quickley would be here if the Knicks got to the promised land winning a championship. So I want him here. But this is a negotiation. And we're going to be talking a lot about the CBA and the second apron responsibilities and what all that entails. And you got to be really smart and careful with the money you're giving out if you really want to build your team into a championship contender in this new era of the NBA, because it is a dawn of a new day. Like, things are very different now with these new CBA rules.
And it's also important to point out, the Quickley does not have the Knicks over the barrel here. The Knicks, if anything, have the leverage, because worst case scenario from a Knicks perspective, they failed to sign Quickley to an extension, which they obviously would prefer to lock him in and have him in-house and, not have to worry about the future. But let's say, seemingly worst case scenario for the Knicks, if they don't sign him, if he plays really well, that's good for the Knicks. Obviously, improves the chance of next season, etc. And he could get a high offer, but the Knicks, he'll be restricted. So what the Knicks will always have the final say. Next summer, they're in this position. They can say, okay, you don't like the offer we sent, go out, get something better, and we'll match it. If they don't sign him to an extension and he plays poorly, then maybe they lock him into a 4-year, $60 million deal. Next summer if he drops his value. To your point, if he plays like he did in the postseason, for months at a time in the regular season, his value is going to get hurt. Those are the things that they'll have to weigh. But again, I understand where you're coming from. I understand there's going to be people in Quickley's ear saying, do not accept a penny less than $100 million.
Right.
But I think, both sides, again, to your point about, Randall and Barrett, there seems to be a good bedside manner. They seem to be, because there's a lot of the reason the people didn't think Barrett would accept less than the max, and he accepted far less than the max, was because there's egos involved, and your agent wants to make sure at number 3 overall pick gets more than Tyler Hero, gets more than Jordan Poole. But whether it's negotiation tactics or whatever the case might be, Knicks seem to be able to, like I said, thread that needle where it's not an offensive offer, but it still keeps their cap. It keeps their cap relatively clean. And to your point, and we've mentioned this on the pod before, 16 teams made the playoffs. There were another 4 teams that made the play-in tournament. Of those 20 teams, the Knicks are the one and only organization that did not have a single player making more than $28 million this year. So many teams have a few guys making 50, and then they have to round out their roster with minimum salary guys. The beauty of the Knicks really under Leon Rose, and if they become successful, it's a copycat league. Other teams will copycat it. Is try to find a bevy of guys in that 15 to 30 range. You have to strike gold with a Jalen Brunson, and sometimes you're going to strike out with a guy like Evan Fournier. But do you flip that piece, etc.? And then obviously draft well. So those are the things that are going to kind of play into this situation here. And like I said, and one last thing before we move on from the IQ situation. As we talked about the Josh Hart scenario, I think it's going to, give us an idea of what happens if the Knicks if Hart does opt in and then sign the extension, etc. The Knicks are more likely to use that mid-level. And as we talked about on Tuesday's show, it's hard to envision signing a guy to $12+ million a year for him to play 10 minutes a night. So if you're signing somebody to mid-level extension, maybe your thinking is, okay, we're signing this guy to replace this guy in the rotation, not to add this guy to the rotation. And maybe his IQ is that guy that they put out feelers and have a move down the line. So just something to keep in mind.
That is something I would think about as well. But I know, as I said, if I was Leon Rose and I saw that playoff performance, I come in negotiation like this.
You could use that against him.
I'm just saying. I love IQ, but this is a business.
Yep.
This is a business. Anyway, like I said, NBA free agency is upon us. This is our NBA free agency spectacular extravaganza, whatever you want to call it. It begins Friday. Teams will be able to, quote unquote, legally contact free agents and negotiate contracts. We know a lot of that's happening already. Among the big free agents you have this year, Kyrie Irving, James Harden, Draymond Green, Chris Middleton, Kyle Kuzma, Fred VanVleet, Brooke Lopez, Jeremy Grant, Harrison Barnes, Austin Reeves, and plenty more. One expected free agent who is already off the board now is Nikola Vucevic. He actually signed or has agreed to a 3-year, $60 million deal to return to Chicago. So that's one name off the board going back to Chicago. But when we think about these big name free agents, Tommy, any guys you could see potentially changing teams this offseason?
I thought it was very interesting. Mark Stein in his Substack this morning, you'd heard kind of rumors about Fred VanVleet, the Rockets throwing some money at Fred VanVleet. Per Stein, this is a quote, "It would be a legitimate league-wide surprise now if Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks don't strike verbal agreements to join the Houston Rockets Friday night." So it seemed like it was kind of, something kind of on the periphery. Maybe it happens, but the Rockets have upwards of $50 million in cap space, by far the most in the NBA. There's a lot of talk around the league. Who are they going to throw that money at? Who are they going to, give somebody a real tough decision to turn down that money? Sounds like Fred VanVleet's that guy. Then kind of the rest of the dominoes will fall into place, because once the Rockets cap space is used up, there's very few teams that can offer more than 20, 25, let alone a max contract. So then teams are going to have to fight it out for the mid-level guys and some other players we'll talk about. But that could be a very interesting first domino to fall. It'd be fascinating to see what the Rockets do should they sign, in particular, Fred VanVleet. I've long been a fan of FEV. I was hoping the Knicks would sign him when he originally signed his contract to stay in Toronto. As it turned out, I was wrong, and the Knicks smartly saved that cap space and money and invested into Jalen Brunson, which looks like a brilliant signing right now. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but that's definitely one name I'll be keeping an eye on early Friday around 6 o'clock or so.
Yeah, I think that Fred VanVleet is probably all but gone. I think from Toronto, it appears that they may be going in a different direction. There's a lot of money that can be spent by a team like the Rockets that I think will make Toronto have to really think and say, hey, we're a team that missed the playoffs. We're kind of a team in a little bit of a no man's land, and that would make for an interesting conversation what they do with Pascal Siakam. Where
and since we're on the Raptors, did you happen to notice that there was a certain Raptors small forward that changed?
Oh yes. OG Anunoby, who was a Clutch Sports client. I believe Rich Paul was his actual agent. Has left Clutch Sports and he is signed with CAA. So
CAA, that sounds familiar, EJ. Is there any Knicks connections with CAA?
Yeah, quite a few. The president of the Knicks used to run CAA, so there you go.
Okay. And his son, I think his son does. He's an agent for CAA. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, son's an agent for CAA. Son's an agent for Knicks representative for some Knicks players on the team currently. So that was very interesting, and some of the departure we're seeing from Clutch Sports are also interesting as well to note. But yes, OG Anunoby, he's changed agencies, and usually when you see a guy change agencies, usually it means they're trying to get out of their current situation. So him going to CAA, an agency that is deeply tied to the Knicks, also an interesting note. So Toronto, they got a lot going on. I don't think that honestly at this point, I don't know if giving Fred VanVleet $140 million makes a lot of sense for them at this point if they know that they're probably looking down the barrel of a rebuild. So he's a name. I think Kyle Kuzma is going to be a name that's going to be mentioned, because I don't think Washington is going to be all that interested in probably bringing him back. So we'll see what kind of money he gets out there on the open market. I'm curious. I've seen a lot about Harrison Barnes too. Like, it doesn't sound like Sacramento is like hell bent on bringing him back, which is a little surprising, because I thought he was a really kind of perfect veteran, perfect kind of guy to kind of hold that thing together, kind of a glue guy for the Kings. But I think that he's going to end up getting good money from somewhere. But it feels like those top end guys, Kyrie, Harden, Green, Middleton, it sounds like those guys will likely stay where they are. Do you think there's any chance any of those guys potentially get sent somewhere else?
It sounds like Harden's leaning Philadelphia now, and if Van Vliet goes to Houston, then that'll kind of settle it, make an easy decision for him. Though we'll find out tonight if he opts in. That's the other thing. He can opt in and then play the game and kind of kick the can down the road, and maybe join Houston in a couple of years. Because it sounds like that's where he kind of wants to spend his twilight. So we'll see how that plays. I'm shocked, but it sounds like the Mavs are going to give Kyrie Irving close to $200 million over 4 or 5 years, which it's such an incredibly unwise decision, in my opinion. This guy has proven that he doesn't make teams better, and that you regret handing him guaranteed a contract with guaranteed money. We'll see how that plays itself out. Draymond Green was the one name that I thought was interesting. I actually even had some thoughts about a potential sign and trade involving the Knicks. Maybe the Knicks send Randall and bring Draymond Green east. But with Jordan Poole shipped out to Washington, it seems like the Warriors are going to commit to keep their core 3 guys intact and see if they can push along here. So I Chris Middleton, I assume he signs with the Bucks. And Brook Lopez.
I was a little surprised he opted out. I mean, he's making $40+ million this next year. He's been really injury prone. I'll be curious. Like, does he get like a what do you call it, like a lifetime achievement kind of contract from the Bucks, saying, hey, you've been a great Buck, you won a championship, so here's money you're probably never gonna ever live up to? Because he's a guy that I looked at when I was thinking about players available this offseason. I said, look, the Knicks could get a healthy Chris Middleton, that'd be great, but he just looks nothing like that player anymore at this point.
I'd roll the dice on Middleton if I could, even at a high price. I think the issue, and he realizes this, and the Bucks realize this, if they lose him for nothing, they can't use that $40 million and invest in a player. He basically, I don't think he's going to get I don't think he's going to get a $50 million annual. He may get 35, but then guarantee it over 4 years or 5 years, something along those lines. Which obviously is a risk, but so he may actually take a pay cut, based on it. He make less, or maybe 40, and then a descending value contract. But what are the Bucks going to do if they lose him and Lopez, Middleton and Lopez? You have Giannis, who's inching closer to free agency, which is obviously some Knicks fans are keeping an eye on. You have to do what it takes to keep him happy. Drew Holiday's money is going to be coming off the books soon, so I could see them headed in that direction. But I do think he resigns there.
Yeah, and when it comes to some of the bigger bargains among this free agent class, any guys you look at and say, this guy may not go for 150, 100 million, but a team that gets this guy could be getting a steal. Yeah,
so I wrote about 15 players the Knicks can target on my Substack this morning, so it's publishing out there. A couple names. One, I'm surprised that Karis LeVert has gotten so little kind of attention buzz over the last couple weeks and months leading into free agency. This is a guy, we saw him firsthand against that series. He was the guy that didn't seem intimidated.
Yeah, he was like the only guy besides Mitchell causing any problems for the Knicks during that series.
Totally. Averaged 18 points, 5.5 rebounds, 3.3 made threes. The final 4 games of that series, when they finally kind of turned him loose and let him play some minutes. Started 30 games for the Cavs last year, averaged 15, 4, and 5 in those contests. Shot over 42% from 3. So again, he's a guy that's had some injury issues in years past, but appeared in 74 games this season. As I wrote in my post, I would prefer him to DiVincenzo if I had the choice between the two in terms of the full mid-level. It sounds like the Cavs are going to they traded a first-round pick for him. It sounds like they're going to offer him in the $15 million range, so it'll exceed what the highest, what all those other teams that have the mid-level. It sounds. I think it was Chris Fedor of the Cleveland Plain Dealer who reported that they'd be comfortable in that $15 to $18 million range, which would take the Knicks out of competition. He's one guy that I would love to see slip through the cracks. Grant Williams on Boston. It seems like he might have played his last game in Beantown with the trade of Kristaps Porzingis. Celtics also drafted Jordan Walsh out of Arkansas.
Yeah.
So they have some depth there, you would assume, to make up for Williams coming off a relatively poor postseason, especially compared to his 2022 postseason. But I love the way Williams plays, tenacity, heart. He's aggressive, and those are the type of characteristics that win you spots in Tom Thibodeau's rotation. Seth Curry's a name. A lot of people have talked about the Knicks want shooters. That's certainly somebody I'd be interested in. Joe Ingles, kind of that same mold. Veteran, sharpshooter, reliable locker room presence. One player that I, talk about undervalued guys, Matisse Thybulle. As a player I've liked for a long time. I like those kind of, elite perimeter defenders. He's restricted, so you assume that the Blazers would match any reasonable contract, but he's definitely something I'm going to kick the tires on, because I think he would fit in perfectly. When you talk about high usage offensive players with limited defensive abilities, Jalen Brunson, Julius Randle, to name two specifically, you can stick a guy like that alongside them, and he can kind of hide in the corner. Shot 42% for Portland over the final 2 months of the season. A couple of the names I'll just throw at you. Danilo Gallinari. Sounds like he's going to receive a buyout with Washington. Would he be willing to eat up some minutes at the 4, especially if the Knicks move on from Obi Toppin? And Yuta Watanabe played well for Brooklyn last season. I was looking at his numbers this morning. They're really quite impressive. Shot over 49% from the floor, shot 44.4% from behind the arc. Plays with an aggressive and kind of infectious spirit on both ends of the floor. 279 players attempted more than 100 3-pointers last season. He was one of only 2 to shoot above 49 from the floor, above 44 from 3. The other was Luke Kennard. So I think he's one of those guys that, at this time of the year and over the next few weeks, everybody will be looking for the next Bruce Brown player, where the Nuggets got him for a $5 million contract, and he was a key bench piece on a team that won a championship. Those are the teams, those are the players, especially in this new CBA, which we'll talk about in a minute, kind of those fringe pieces that can kind of put you over the top that you need to excel.
Yeah, and Watanabe is an interesting case to me, because in many ways he excelled in the role that Tom Thibodeau has kind of burdened onto Obi Toppin, like this stand in the corner and shoot threes and run around guy, be that guy. Even though Obi Toppin drafted as a lottery pick, number 8 pick in the draft, national player of the year in college, you would think that he would have a role much bigger than that. That's the role that Watanabe has carved himself a place in the league with. I actually got to interview Watanabe when he was a G League player years ago. So to see him, and a two-way player, so to see him kind of become what he became for the Nets was really awesome for me. So like, I looked at him as a free agent. I thought that if there's a Watanabe to the Knicks deal, I would be looking at seeing, okay, where's Obi Toppin's next home going to be? Yeah. It feels like he would be kind of a perfect fit with Tom Thibodeau. I've mentioned Seth Curry a ton. I know there's a weird kind of log jam in the backcourt, and they just picked up Miles McBride's option, which they should have done, obviously. But they need shooting, and they need to have options if guys aren't playing well that they could put in that can make shots. I think that's also some of the issues the Knicks have, like whether it's been, as much as I love Deuce, but you just Deuce or Jericho Sims being those guys kind of on the fringe of the rotation. Neither of those guys come in and make shots. They're going to give you defense and energy and things like that, but there needs to be an option that, okay, if we're not making shots, we can go to somebody else who makes shots, not another guy who's going to guard somebody. So I would love to see Seth Curry here. I feel like it's probably unlikely given the logjam at the guard position, unless they decide to move on from some of these guys in the backcourt, as we mentioned. And it's funny, I don't know how much money Bruce Brown's going to get, but the way he played in the finals, I kind of wondered, hey, is there a spot for him on this team as a backup guard? Like, is he going to make more than a mid-level exception? I can't imagine that, but I don't know.
Kurt Heelan of NBC reported that he thinks he gets $15 million a year. So We'll see.
Yeah, I mean that's that finals bump, you know.
Yes.
It's like, he's a good player. I don't know if I'd give him 15 million, but he's a guy I also will consider. I think this is probably gonna be one of the more interesting free agencies maybe ever, because there's not that much money, very few teams under the cap. So almost the entire league is working with essentially the mid-level exception of varying degrees, whether it's taxpayer or the full mid-level.
Well,
and then you have all these guys who are kind of like slightly better than mid-level exception kind of guys. So like, how many of these guys will actually spring loose and be available for these teams to sign? It's going to make it really interesting.
Well, the Knicks' number one priority will be a player that it sounds like it's not going to be restricted. Portland Trailblazer Cam Reddish. So make that as number one priority. So we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah. It's just crazy to see how, it happens when you have a team and these are the guys you have. So we're all in on these guys and we talk so much about these guys. And it's funny, I've been talking about it a lot with like the Mets when I do my show on WFAN, and like, we were just going crazy about Cam Reddish, and there's these civil wars among Knicks fans over the uses of Cam Reddish, when like in the grand scheme of the NBA, Cam Reddish is just a guy. Yep. I use the S word on WFAN describing these Mets because they were losing. I'm not going to put that on Cam Reddish, but those Mets guys are scrubs. A lot of these guys that were complaining about a scrub, and that's a $345 million team. I'm not going to say Cam Reddish is a scrub, but like the fact that people are getting worked up over Cam Reddish games, and this is now another team that's moved on from him, is
18 months. 3 franchises have had the opportunity to hold on to Cam Reddish, and and said, "Nah, we're good." It was nice meeting you, but take care.
Yeah. So maybe it wasn't, Tom. As much as I have my issue with Tom Thibodeau, maybe it just wasn't all Tom Thibodeau's issue with Cam Reddish not being able to produce. So. The last thing before we get to the CBA, which we want to talk about in relation to free agency, do you think any more big trades happen? Like, I feel like what I fear is going to happen is like this offseason is going to feel not that, what's the word? Like not that eventful, because maybe a lot of these big names end up going back to their old teams. And we'll kind of forget that the big trades happened kind of already with Porzingis, Chris Paul twice, and Bradley Beal. Like, is there, and now it sounds like Dame Lillard may be okay with whatever Portland's doing. Like, I don't know what's going on with that. Like, do you think any other big trades happen this offseason, or do you think that we're kind of done with some of the big stars moving?
Is Dame Lillard the starting point guard for the Blazers on opening night in October?
I really think he will be. I think it's going to be insane. But like, and I don't know if this is some long game that Lillard's playing where eventually he's going to then pull the rug out from them. But it just seems like.
I think he wants to win. I think he wants to stay in Portland. It's
I do too.
Yeah. And I honestly, I don't have an issue with it. I think some people that have, called him out soft and, doesn't want to win enough. Like, you can't have it both ways. You can't knock KD for joining super teams, and today's players, like, all they want to do is join up with other players. Like, yeah. Barkley, didn't want to do that, even though we did. Jordan didn't need to do that, even though we had Pippen. A million other reasons. Stockton and Malone, they had each other. There's all these, today's players are soft because they just want to join super teams. They don't want to do it on their own. Like, okay, you can knock players for that, but then you can't also knock Dame for staying loyal to his organization. Like, I've always been surprised that more people aren't understanding. Like, let's say you're making, a good living as an insurance adjuster on Long Island, and then some company in Myrtle Beach offers you to double your salary. Are you going to uproot your family when your sister-in-law and right. Grandma and grandpa live 2 towns over, and you can meet with your best friend lives in the city, you get together once a month? Like, there are other intrinsic values. It's not just about highest, obviously. And with
Lillard, it's not even a salary thing. He's going to make the same money wherever he goes.
Exactly. So if he's just comfortable where he's at in the community, he places a higher, even if he won a championship with the Miami Heat, does it mean more to him to advance, to improve the Blazers and have only a 5% chance of making the finals? And listen, there's a scenario in which the Blazers have a good team next year. Scoot Henderson's a teenager, but he's a really talented, tenacious teenager. The Shadon Sharp make a big jump this year. You assume they're going to re-sign Jeremy Grant. There's Nurkic is a good center. There's a path there. Anthony Simons is a great shooter. They keep Dame together, stay around 500, maybe move Simons at the deadline if Scoot plays as well and get a wing or whatever the case might be. Thibault takes a step forward. Listen, the Nuggets are the odds-on favorite, yes, but after that, does any other team in the West scare you? Could you not beat the Grizzlies in a 7-game series? It wouldn't be impossible for them to beat the Warriors or Lakers or the Mavericks in a 7-game series. So there's opportunities there. It's not as if he's guaranteed to finish, with the 13th worst record in the West, which is actually fascinating. I heard somebody talking about it this morning. When's the last time we entered a season? Now the Wizards have already hit the tank rebuild mode. Is there any other team? The Pistons seem to be wanting to. They just paid their coach $100 million. They have good. Cade Cunningham's coming back. The Magic want to make the playoffs this year. Has there ever been a time that 29 of the 30 teams or more in the NBA want to make the playoffs? I can't remember one.
Yeah, and I think for those who are familiar with this draft class coming up, it's because it is not nearly as good as the class that just happened. So I think some of that is okay. We tried for Victor, we all lost except for the Spurs, so now it's time to try to win because we're not itching to draft some of these kids that are going to be going in the top 3 next year. So we just talked
about the Rockets. They're gonna throw $80 million at a win now point guard. In his prime. So fascinating stuff.
Yep, it is. So okay. The NBA's new collective bargaining agreement is signed, sealed, and delivered to all 30 teams. Apparently, those 30 teams are freaking out because it's like 600 plus pages, and they're trying to all learn what the hell is actually in it. I'm surprised there was so much confusion about it, but nonetheless, that's been the whole deal. So they're all sent out. It goes to effect Friday with free agency starting. There are significant changes that are already shaping the way teams are conducting business this offseason. Season 1 being the much talked about luxury tax aprons being implemented at the start of next season, not this upseason coming up, the season after that. Teams with combined salaries reaching $7 million above the luxury tax line will be hit with a few minor penalties, like being banned from signing buyout players and some few trade restrictions. That is the first apron. But then there is the second apron, and this is the thing that people are scared about. This is where the harshest penalties come in. So those teams will be unable to aggregate salaries in a trade. They'll be unable to use the taxpayer mid-level exception. They will not be able to send out players in a sign and trade. And they will have this first ever that I've ever heard of in any kind of sport, this deal where your first round pick 7 years out gets quote unquote frozen, which means that it cannot be traded. And that pick will actually be moved to the end of the first round if you remain in that second apron for 2 of the ensuing 4 years. The only way to get out of that is by not being in that apron for 3 of the next 4 years. So if you hit it once, you can't trade that pick for 4 years. You can get out of it, but for 4 years, you can't do anything with it. So these are very intense penalties when it comes to the luxury tax aprons. And Tommy, a lot of people have been talking a lot about this. How much of an impact do you expect this new CBA to have on this year's free agency?
Free agency, not so much, because like we said, a lot of teams didn't have cap space to begin with. I think the more you're going to see it are kind of the moves on the margins. We saw with John Collins, the Hawks dumping his salary to avoid bumping up against that apron. And the other thing, there's been a lot of talk about how it'll affect the high-end guys, and it will. That's why we've had names like Karl Anthony Towns mentioned, and why we both agree the Knicks shouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. Why the Bulls are going to have to make a decision, especially with Vooch back. They bring back DeRozan and Levine. Can they improve their team without moving one of those guys? So there's a lot of stuff on the up top guys. But another thing that that hasn't been mentioned much that I think is very relevant is in years past there was a salary floor, but there was no real penalty to not reaching that salary floor. Just basically a fine. You wouldn't get funds redistributed. Now you have to hit that salary floor. There's penalties for it, and you have to hit it before the season starts. So we talk about trades. One kind of rumor that's made its way around the internet the last couple of days is, would the team like the Spurs be willing to take on Evan Fournier's contract to meet that salary floor and have him serve as a mentor for Wembanyama? So those type of things might kind of kick up some dust and be a little bit more feasible. But make no mistake, the immediate impact is going to be dulled a little bit because some of these rules don't take effect until the next basketball calendar year, which is July of 2024, when a lot of those restrictions really start to kick in. But teams are being forced to think about it now, and that's why the Knicks value contracts are even more. They were very valuable 6 months ago. They're exceedingly valuable today. A guy like, Randall making $27 million, Brunson making $25 million each of the next 2 years. Those are the type of contracts that have exceptional value. Whereas it didn't seem like a big deal to sign Karl-Anthony Towns to a contract that's going to pay him $60 million in 26-27 because, the cap's going to increase, etc. Yes, the cap will increase, but now there's penalties if you want to expand and build around those teams. So those are the situations. Those are the new realities for teams.
And another interesting thing about that cap increasing, which a lot of people don't realize, is unlike in that weird kind of fluky year where the Warriors were able to sign Kevin Durant because a new TV deal came in. Now, in this new CBA, the salary cap can only increase up to 10% from the previous year. So if there is a lot of money coming in a new TV deal, that essentially will have to be distributed over several years. It's not going to just be, all right, 1 year, here's all this money to all these teams, and everybody's under the cap. You can now sign it so that we all got paid. That's not going to happen anymore. So you're right. This idea that you just give out money and say, well, the cap will increase, so it doesn't matter. That's not quite the case, which is, again, goes back to that Emmanuel Quickley conversation we had about just saying, we can just pay him $100 million. Who cares? Well, there's not just a big, mulligan coming to every team like I think maybe people thought prior to this new CBA. So that is a big thing. And when you talk about the impact on this free agency, I agree. It may not be in the free agents, but I think maybe it will be when it comes to trades that happen. We talk about this offseason, will there be a lot of trades or did we see a lot of them? Again, the Bradley Beal trade was essentially the first domino of this, where the Wizards wanted to rebuild anyway, but they were going to be looking at if they brought back Porzingis, if they brought back Kyle Kuzma, and then they kept Beal, that they're probably looking close at that second apron saying, hey, we don't want to be near that. We're a bad team. So, and you had no teams wanting to then trade for Bradley Beal. That's the other thing, too. You had Bradley Beal, people saying, how did Bradley Beal only go for basically no first-round picks, an old player that they were going to buy out or trade, and no young players to boot? Well, that's because a guy making $50+ million that's not a superstar or a top 15 player is a terrible value. And especially in this new NBA. Now the Suns, they're a situation where they have a new owner, they want to make a splash, and they took that risk. But there was a report I read this morning that apparently Mickey Harrison told Pat Riley, "Do not bring Bradley Beal in here. I'm not paying that thing, doing that second apron for a player of this caliber." So that kind of took the Miami Heat out of that negotiation. So that I think may be where you see it. You may see more of those trades. If it's not a Beal, maybe it's more like a John Collins trade, like you saw earlier last week, or this week, whenever it happened, when you'll see guys get booed and you're like, wow, that's it. Well, yeah, because some teams can't afford to pay some of the money they're giving out.
Yeah, 100%. That's the thing that fans have a tough time. And, granted, fans don't have time to read 676 pages.
Yeah.
So they figure, well, yeah, of course so when Knicks fans, yes, you trade for Karl-Anthony Towns in a second. Why wouldn't you do that? Well, because it's opportunity cost. It's if you pay this guy $60 million, what do you have to sacrifice in order to get there? And those are the issues.
It is, but it will make for an interesting offseason. I think that the NBA, unlike any other sport, has really made the offseason a true event. It's something to look forward to. The player movement now is a part of the engagement with its fans now. So this is going to be a fun one to watch. We'll see how much movement there is. Usually it tend to be surprises that nobody expects, like Rudy Gobert getting traded randomly, and you got Brian Windhorst doing the fingers. He kind of gave us a little bit of a moment like that on ESPN Cleveland, talking about things he was hearing about the Cavs, that he kind of walked all that stuff back. Is that because he walked back because he wasn't supposed to say it, or was it because he realized he caused the firestorm? He didn't want to. We'll see what happens with that. But I think that's a good place to leave it, though. So I want to thank you guys for checking out this edition of Orange and Blue Bloods, a free agency extravaganza. It all begins Friday. So NBA fans, Knicks fans, keep your phones ready. Get your notifications ready. You want to keep, first of all, you should put your notifications on for Tommy Beer and myself. But besides that, Make sure you put your notifications on for Shams and Woj when they tweet, because they'll be dropping a lot of news beginning at midnight. So make sure, as we record this podcast Thursday, so make sure you're ready for that. But again, this is Orange Blue Buzz. Thank you guys for checking us out. Of course, this is a podcast you can get wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time we drop. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube. Find us on the WFAN and Audacy Sports channels. Tommy, let people know where they can find you.
At Tommy Beer on Twitter.
You can find me, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, Action EJ on Instagram. Thank you guys again so much for checking us out. For Tommy, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest podcast ventures. Links will be in the descriptions. And as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you in our next video.